30 years ago, the big film we had to go to see was Forrest Gump. I can remember going along to the cinema to watch it. It was a memorable film. I can remember being in the cinema and watching it. I can remember the feelings it gave me. And it was very funny. And it took you on a journey. It was a great story, wasn't it? And this guy with a low IQ that sort of goes into the world and all this stuff happens to him. A lot of bad stuff, a lot of good stuff, and he comes to the end of it, and it's a really interesting story, and there's funny bits. He keeps cropping up, you know, he meets all the presidents of America, and he invents stuff and all this sort of thing, sort of unknowing. I really enjoyed it. I always thought it was a great film. Then you get older, don't you? You get older, and I'm sat with my daughter, we're flicking through different films, and as much as I'd like to show a Citizen Kane or The Red Shoes, or the films I love, I came across Forrest Gump, which to her is like a film from another era. It's like when I used to sit and watch, you know, The Grapes of Wrath with my parents, you know, and I can remember sitting there watching these old black and white films. It was from another time. And for my kids, that's what this represents. This is a film made 30 years ago, right? For my daughter, a lifetime before she was born. So we sat down and we watched it. And of course, she had the same reaction as me. But I had a different reaction. As the film neared its end, it hit me the incredible artistic achievement of that film in setting out a story that communicates a deep truth in an objective way. A film that was made right at the time when we thought that, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, that the you know, experimental film was great because you didn't know what was going on, so you brought your own interpretation. And all those artistic ideas that was so progressive and avant-garde throughout this second half of the 20th century, which had found their way into film, you know. But this was much more like an old-fashioned Hollywood film, but it wasn't at the same time. Robert Zemeckis, who made it, of course, had become famous for making the Back to the Future series. Another film series that when I showed it to my kids when they were very little, they fell in love with it and would watch it on repeat over and over again. Robert Zemeckis, not a director that we would reel off as being one of the great directors, not Martin Scorsese, you know, not a Kubrick. Robert Zemeckis, and as time went on, Robert Zemeckis has explored technology more and more. But then when I started to think about it, I thought, yeah, but there's profound stuff in it. Every single one. Polar Express is a deep exploration of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, isn't it? And how faith works. Isn't it? Back to the Future is a contemplation on time, and it explores the limits of a universe that is structured within a time and space scale. It plays with that, and it explores how Hollywood relates to that, how culture relates to that. Robert Zemeckis has a way of taking contemporary culture and referencing it. He's kind of like an auteur. There are certain things he's interested in. He's not just making schlocky popularist films, popular though many of them have been. His take on A Christmas Carol, which was a bit of a failure, is a take on what I think is one of the greatest stories of all time, and plays out something so profound. So I was sat there going, he does this a lot. He is dealing with you don't think he is. You think he's like one of these sort of, he uses like lots of special effects, right? He's a bit like a third-rate Spielberg in a way. That's how I've always thought of him. But Spielberg doesn't deal with these ideas. Spielberg is much more the establishment, you know, postmodernist, liberal identity politics type of director. Those are the values that he pushes. You know, there's a lot of the Spielberg films, when you get underneath it, it's very much like there are religious elements in his film. There's a tendency for him to deal with aspects of Christianity and Judaism mixed with a sort of contemporary coming from a broken home and that's okay aesthetic. That's what it says. But I don't find there's anything profound in that. But Forrest Gump, by the end of it, I was almost shaking with the message of that film. And I always find it really interesting when I can find something so profound within something which is so popularistic. Because within that popularism seems to be the esoteric. And so on this video, I am going to explore the esoteric aspects of Forrest Gump. The film opens up with a feather that's blowing in the wind. Of course, the feather that blows in the wind represents the fickleness of fate. It represents a certain worldview. The feather is being tossed on the winds, and the winds are a product of energies and pressures and science. And science is just this material thing. It just blows randomly. There's no order to a feather, is it? It's all floating all over the place. And we use that as a metaphor for being like that, you know. And at the beginning of this film, it could land anywhere. But it lands on this guy that's sat on a park bench, apparently waiting for a bus. He's waiting for a bus, but his bus is not coming. So he starts to tell his life story to whoever sat next to him. Now that feather could have landed on anybody, so it could have been anybody telling their story, couldn't it? It could have been anybody telling their story. But in Forrest Gump's case, his story is remarkable. And it's made more remarkable that Forrest Gump has an incredibly low IQ. He is what we call a stupid person, right? He's a stupid person, but he has been brought up with a certain moral codes. Now, of course, morality, which is the first thing he starts to explain. He starts to talk about his mom and how he was brought up and how she wanted the best for him. The first story we hear is how she made him go into a normal school and his back didn't work and he couldn't walk, but he was made to walk. And he had these things put on his legs and everyone picked on him and everyone picked on him at school. All this we hear, and we establish these two things, these two women in his life. His mom, who's brought him up well. She's got a set of principles. So he's stupid, but he's principled. And then his best friend, and she is kind. When he gets on the school bus, his friend is the only one that offers him a seat. She has a different look on at life. She's more open. She is more open to different ideas than anybody else in that school. And they become best friends. And when we say best friends, they develop a very, very strong love between them. Now, the story is really him going out into the world and retaining the love he has for this girl, Jenny, throughout all these remarkable tales, these episodic tales that seem to go all the way through 20th century culture. 20th century culture is really explored on this. It's seated in a very important time. It's the period of time that on my main music channel we're obsessed with. It's the rock and roll era. Right early on, he meets Elvis Presley, and because of the metal braces on his legs, he shows him a dance, and Elvis Presley copies that dance, making Elvis Presley world famous. But then he remarks that man, who is just some bloke he met in a hotel, died. He died. A lot of these people that he meets, they're great, but they die, right? They seem to befall some sort of tragedy. But although tragedies come his way throughout his life, although he's dealt the worst hand, his morality and his principles shine through. His morality and his principles shine through all the way through this. Now, when we say shine through, the life that he's told is remarkable, right? And we delight in, and I've always loved pictures like this. It starts very small in his local community, in his little town, and it's this little town, little American town. But then he goes out into the world and he goes everywhere. He, he becomes an American football champion because he's brilliant at running. He then joins the Vietnam War. He saves a whole ton of people. He gets the Medal of Honor. And one of the people he saves is his captain, Captain Dan, or Lieutenant Dan, I think. Now, Dan is different to his mom. He's like his mom when he goes to war, but his mom's a Christian lady and she brings him up with a set of values that are rooted in Christian values. But Dan is an atheist. When the mom dies, she dies with dignity. He's called back to see his mom. She's got cancer, and she explains it in a way that Forrest can deal with. Explains it. She could always explain things to me well, she says. He doesn't understand the rest of the world. A lot of the comedy comes out of the fact that he misunderstands things. And through misunderstanding things, you would think that he would do very badly, but he doesn't. He becomes a multimillionaire 3 times over. He creates different trends. He's involved in all the major cultural events. He meets the president. All these things happen all the way through it. And those are the things you delight in. But for me, the figures that mean something to him, which is Jenny, who is a progressive. She represents free spirits. And she goes into the 60s and she falls for all the problems of that 60s freedom. Now, remember, this is made in the 1990s, and this artistically is almost acting as a pushback against the civil rights movement. It pokes fun a lot at that a lot. At one point, he comes back from Vietnam. He gets accidentally in the queue of hippies, and he's brought out, into Washington to give one of those huge speeches. And he becomes, he wins that over, even though they can't hear what he's saying. If they heard what he's saying, they probably would have got him. But fate comes along, doesn't it? Shuts his microphone. Fate's always coming along like that feather. The fact is that Forrest Gump's had a life that is unreal. Despite the fact of being stupid, his morality supposedly has taken him through life, and all the decisions he's made have sort of been right, despite him not really knowing. But is it because he's acting from a good moral principle? Is that really what's making him? And it seems to be the case. Dan's an atheist. Once he gets his legs blown off, which he sees Forrest as being the cause of, which is very interesting because Dan is from a line of soldiers, so his fate, and this is what this film's really about, is fate. His fate was to die with his soldiers. So when it doesn't happen and Forrest saves him, he comes in and changes the fate. He works against fate. His whole life is him working against fate. Every time he does something, whatever he does seems to have effects on people. And this random person that his feather just picked is actually an agent for change. Little bit like that sort of conspiracy theory about Jar Jar Binks in the prequels, that he is actually the most important character in Star Wars. I think because he's an idiot and everything he's doing is churning the story forward. Maybe it's the idiots that do change. What is it about an idiot that makes things happen? Maybe it's the fact that they're not thinking like everybody else. I don't know. But as this film emerges, there's a profound truth emerging for me. And it's about fate. Dan, of course, is an atheist. So in a drunken, sex-fueled binge that he's having in front of Forrest, that Forrest doesn't want to be involved in, but he's sticking by his friend Dan, when this prostitute takes the mickey, his morality kicks in and he defends him. He defends his friend. And then he says that because you see, the thing is with Forrest, he's incredibly principled. His best friend, Bubba, who seems to be as stupid as him, all he wants to be is a shrimp fisherman. He dies. It's terrible, right? Bubba and Forrest, they're not evil people. They're not stained by the curse of rationalism. They take things as they find them. Forrest sees beauty in the Vietnamese War. Not in the war itself, but he sees beauty in the fact that every now and then the rain stops and it's night time and he's on his own. And he looks up and he sees the stars and he knows that the love of his life, Jenny's looking at the same stars. That's another motif that goes through this. They're in the same world together. At one point when he hasn't seen her, she apologises for not being with him. And he says, "You were always with me." Almost like people would say about Jesus or God. Religion plays a great part in this. Dan is an atheist, but he finds peace. He finds peace through Forrest. Forrest also turns him into a multimillionaire. Forrest is a multimillionaire. Eventually, Jenny, who's been on this odyssey, exploring the freedoms of the 1960s, pays the price. Drugs, bad men, all this sort of stuff pays the price. She comes back to see Forrest and she uses him. She uses him just to get some normality so she can then duck back in. But she loves him. Even though she can't love him, she does love him. Love is very important in this. Forrest has love for people. He sticks by them. He shows you what love is. Love. Forrest is all love. That's what he is. He looks after her. He has the best time of his life with her. And he ends up having sex with her when he asks her to marry him. She doesn't marry him, but she has sex with him. She's trying to prove that she loves him through sex. You don't need to do that with Forrest. And then she leaves him. She gives him the gift of that time together, but then she leaves him. And that throws him into an existential crisis, because for the first time in his life, he's seen happiness. Everything up until that has been lessons learned, but he's seen happiness. And happiness was just the mundane, going for walks, eating, right? Jenny says, when he was being picked on by the bullies, she told him to run. That's what he's always done. His one thing he's good at is running. And playing ping pong, of course. So he decides to run. And the existential angst that he's in at that point when she's left him and he's now back to being alone. That thing that we all feel and we all fear of being alone. That hole that we fall into when a long-term relationship ends, whether it's our doing or the other person's doing, and suddenly we're thrown into a crisis. He deals what do it by, he tries to run away from it. He runs and he runs. Of course, he means running. He gets a whole bunch of followers, and they think he's some sort of religious figure. His hair grows long. He gets a great beard. He looks very spiritual. He's just running. He invents the smiley face and the shit happens sticker that goes, all these things he does just by running. And he runs, and when he doesn't feel like running, he goes back. He goes back home. That running episode almost is the climax of the film, but not quite. Jenny has worked through her own problems. She's worked through the freedom of the 1960s and all the problems that are inherent in that freedom, because she's been changed and made to grow up by what makes most of us grow up. She's had a child. She's had Forrest's child. She hasn't told Forrest this. The child is now about 4. And she has written to him and she has told him to come and see her. He's sat on this park bench because he is about to catch the bus to go and see her. And by the time he gets to that point in the story, and the old lady who's decided to settle down and listen to the story to the end, right? At that point when he says, this is what I'm about to do, and of course he's got the box of chocolate, the famous box of chocolates that he's had a few out of, is for her. She says, oh no, you could walk here from here, you don't need to get the bus. So him sat there, he wasted his time. But in that time wasting, he told us the story of his life. We heard it. The feather landed there. Is that feather a part of fate? Was it fated? The film can't exist. The whole story can't exist without that feather. It has to touch his foot. He has to be there. He's not supposed to be there. So we are really dealing throughout this film. It's going, what is there a meaning or not a meaning? Is there a God or is there not a God? Are we just, you know, like the feather blown in the wind, it's just random, and when we die, there's nothing? Or is there meaning to it all? Forrest was brought up that there was a meaning, there was the meaning to his life. He spent his life looking for that meaning, and the meaning in his life was Jenny. He never got her. His whole life, he never got her. He did all these things that normal people think are wonderful. He became rich, he invented stuff, he met famous people, he became famous himself, right? But that is not, it was love that he was trying to pursue. He's trying to pursue love. And his life didn't go to plan. In pursuing love, it didn't go to plan. And he was hurt. He was hurt, even though he had all these things that normal people think was great. Was he happy? And he dealt with it by running, just running, because he had to get somewhere, and the only way he could get there was by running, but there was nowhere to run to. It was just the void for him. It was meaning for everybody else. Throughout this film, this dichotomy, this dialectic is being played with all the time. All the time. So the very setup of the film explores this. For us, that feather's got meaning. For us, it touched on the right person to tell this story. And the story is the vehicle for some sort of truth. What is the truth? Don't know. What is the truth? Is everything fate or not fate? Is everything have a meaning or not meaning? Is there a God? Is there not a God? The big questions this film's dealing with. And it's dealing with through a person that is stupid. They're not supposed to be able to know this, are they? He's the last person who's going to be able to tell this. He's not clever enough to work it out. All the clever people can't work it out. How can Forrest ever work it out? He can't work it out. And then suddenly the film catches up. And we're now in the moment. He runs down the road. He sees Jenny. She walks in. She's got a job. You can see on her face that she has come through something. She's been saved by this child. And she tells Forrest that that's his child. Tom Hanks' acting at that point is astonishing as he looks at the child. It's astonishing. He goes and sits next to the child. The thing that is so powerful for me at that point is, although he's done all this stuff, as though he's been a good person, his worry is that the child is like him, i.e. stupid. He doesn't even have to ask Jenny. Jenny just says, don't worry, he's very, very clever. And you see the relief. That self-loathing that we have, the relief. We know Forrest has got, because all the way through the film, we're going, Jenny, why don't you just stay with Forrest? He's a good man. But you know Jenny's too sophisticated and too freewheeling, and she has to go out and live a life. But he's lived an even bigger life than her. You see how it cannot be solved. You are never going to look at this film and see an answer to this. Except you could say, but Forrest, for all he did, he followed his idea. He followed his love of Jenny. He followed it. And now she returns and she asks him to marry her. He's got what he wanted. But it's fleeting because she, in the sort of 60s excess, and that excess that started in the free sex and the drugs of the 1960s ends up with the AIDS crisis. And of course, this film in 1994 is on the back end of that. She's got AIDS and she's going to die. Like her mom, she's going to die. And she's at peace, like her mom. And she has a good death, and Forrest sees her through it. And then we fast forward and we come up against the key scene. A scene that meant nothing to me when I was a younger man, not having lived my life and being able to judge it on that, I suppose. But he's stood over the grave of his whole raison d'etre. And he starts to tell a story, and he is grieving. It's upsetting me even thinking about it. As he stands over that grave, Robert Zemeckis supplies us with the answer to life, the meaning, and everything in the mouth of someone who was supposedly stupid.
Jenny, I don't know if Mama was right or if it if it's Lieutenant Dan. I don't know if we each have a destiny, or if we're all just floating around accidental like on a breeze. But I think maybe it's both. Maybe both is happening at the same time. I miss you, Jenny. If there's anything you need, I won't be far away.
That is incredibly profound to me. Because art, music, film, everything really deals with that dichotomy fundamentally. And that dichotomy, when the two things come together, is where you meet the sublime. Now, in this film, it comes together in that scene. It's a scene that you would not remember when you think of the film, but actually it's the key scene. He is stood over his dead wife. He is facing the question, is she just a body rotting in the ground, or is she with me? Now, as he said, she was always with him, but he's also aware of the grief. I listened to an interesting podcast yesterday. It was with a cognitive scientist, and he was putting forward the idea that if you look at the way consciousness creates our reality, and you start to really explore that from a scientific point of view, you realize that our senses have evolved for us to survive. And so they don't perceive the world as it is. In fact, we don't, through our perception, we can't learn anything about the world that surrounds us. It is an absolute mystery. And through this, and he talked about his meditation experience, he says meditation is an attempt to shut the thinking mind off. And we feel that with Forrest Gump, that he just naturally is like that. We feel that there's something meditative about him, because he's not that bright. Being clever, what's that phrase? I can't remember who said it. I think it's from Matter of Life and Death, actually, where he says many a man has been undone by his intelligence. So something like that. Forrest has got a clear mind. He's when he's running, it's meditation to him. He reports that there was moments when he was running where he saw beauty. Beauty was what he was running to. Beauty and love. Beauty and love. That's what he was running to his whole life. He was pursuing beauty and love. He was wise because he appreciated truth. He respected truth, and he appreciated beauty. He was able to appreciate beauty. He was wise. And because he had those two things and his mind open, and he could experience the world closer, like this cognitive scientist said, you should have no fear. When you realize the reality of the situation, that we are the world and the world is us, that we are one and the same, that there is no God and there is a God, that these things are meaningless, then we attain peace. But it's impossible to do, because our intelligence will always protect us. It will try and protect us. It will try and protect our ego at all costs. Always. If the universe is so loving and beautiful to us, then put a gun to your head and attain nirvana. But we're not going to, are we? Because we attach to this. Forrest isn't so much attached to it. He's a brave man. He doesn't fear death because of what his mom said. And this is the profound aspect of this film. I wanted to do a video about a month ago about films that portray Christ. I watched the Passion film that Mel Gibson made, and I had a revelation in that. And it's something that I think fundamentalist Christians, fundamentalist Muslims, or wherever should remember. Jesus Christ made the point that our utopia is not here on earth, that our life is suffering, and he showed us a way of dealing with the suffering. And he did that by making the Christianity about the contemplation of suffering, because we all suffer. And when we look at Christ on the cross, we see and contemplate and meditate on suffering. We meditate on suffering, on Christ's suffering. And that is the Christ story. He absolves us of our sins, which is our suffering, by making us meditate on suffering. And his suffering isn't just pain. He is belittled. He is denied. He is told that he's a liar. He is ridiculed. Every aspect in the Passion of Christ is the story of human suffering. He suffers, and in his suffering, he makes suffering the meditation upon which human beings focus. That this world is about suffering. And what gets us through it? Well, when he's on the cross, two things. One thing is he says to God, he's the Son, he's the human being that says, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to me? And then don't judge them. Don't judge them. They don't know what they're doing. The human beings don't know what they're doing. And then he says probably the most important sentence in the history of humanity. It is done. It has been achieved. It has been achieved. Because the story of Christ, the greatest story ever told, is the story of that suffering, and it makes us contemplate. And within that suffering, when we think about it, there's a way of escaping the suffering. He says it to the guy on the cross next to him. It's in believing in him. Right, I'm not a Christian, but I'm a very spiritual person, and I appreciate the aesthetics of stories. And here we have with Forrest Gump of something very similar. Forrest suffers, but he suffers in the way that Christ suffers. And in that suffering, he stands above the dead body of his wife who he loves. And he says the truth, that both viewpoints, whether there is a God or is there a material universe or is it a spiritual universe, all these questions, yes, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. And with that, he returns to his child. He has gone from the son to the father. He is now a father. And they read the book that the feather was put into. The next day, history repeats itself, and he takes his son down to the school bus. But when the son gets on the school bus, he's all in control because he's a lot wiser than Forrest is. And Forrest has brought the book with him. The feather drops out and the feather leaves him, and we leave that story. The feather blows away on the wind. And we get the feeling that feather could blow away on the wind and land on somebody else. It could land on anybody. And their story would contain a profound truth. Would that person not have suffered? No, because we all suffer. But it's how we suffer that counts. And the way to absolve yourself of suffering is to accept the oneness of the universe. Whether you are an atheist or a Christian, is to accept what is, like Forrest Gump, to accept it and to believe in the principle, his moral guiding principle, and that is one of love.